For decades, she was the face of innocence, the original Disney darling, a national treasure. Annette Funicello wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. Her name alone sparked nostalgia, and her smile became a trademark of a more wholesome America. She was the girl next door that every mother trusted, every father adored, and every teenager secretly fell for. But by the end of her life, that same smile had become her prison. Because when the cameras stopped rolling and the stage lights dimmed, Annette wasn't just tired, she was broken. And she didn't scream. She didn't rant or beg to be heard. She simply picked up a pen and did what no one expected from someone so famously gentle. She made a list. 5 names. No descriptions. No context. No forgiveness. Each name etched into the pages of her private diary, like the final credits to a film no one ever wanted to screen. These weren't enemies. They were idols. Legends. People the world still celebrates today. A producer. A co-star. A supposed friend. A childhood crush. And, at the top of the list, the man the world called a genius. A man who created fantasies for millions while quietly orchestrating one young girl's personal hell. This wasn't the story Disney wanted told. This wasn't the legacy Hollywood wanted preserved. But it's the story she left behind. A silent, final scream wrapped in the stillness of ink. So, if you thought you knew who Annette Funicello really was, think again. Because behind the glitter of the Mouseketeer ears and those picture-perfect films was a girl who was never allowed to grow up, to speak up, or even break down. This is the story of how America's princess died with 5 names in her heart. Names that rewrote everything we thought we knew about the so-called magic of Disney. At 12 years old, Annette Funicello wasn't dreaming of fame. She was just a shy girl from Utica, New York. But when Walt Disney saw her perform at a dance recital, he didn't just see talent. He saw an opportunity. Within weeks, she was cast in the Mickey Mouse Club and almost overnight, she became a household name. For most kids, fame is fleeting. For Annette, it was a contract, one written in silence and sealed with obedience. What the public saw was a bubbly teen in mouse ears, singing cheerful songs and teaching life lessons between dance numbers. But behind the scenes, Annette was being sculpted. Every outfit, every word, every public appearance was monitored and modified. She was told how to smile, how to speak, even how to breathe when nervous. Disney didn't just manage her career, they managed her identity. She once revealed she wasn't even allowed to cut her hair without approval from 3 different people: her manager, the studio, and Walt Disney himself. And Disney didn't offer advice. He gave orders with a quiet smile. He didn't need to raise his voice, she later wrote. If he frowned, I knew I'd done something wrong. She wasn't allowed to grow. When puberty hit, it was met with panic, not celebration. Her wardrobe was altered to hide her body. Long sleeves at the beach. No romantic scenes, even if the co-star was her actual boyfriend. When she asked to do more mature roles, to explore different characters, she was told no, every time. The worst part? The message was always delivered sweetly. Through gifts, through smiles, through what she later called velvet ropes. And when she considered walking away, she was brought into Disney's office and handed a small, expensive box. Inside was a gold ring engraved with the letter A. He told her, "You're not going anywhere. You belong to us." She wore it, and she stayed. Because in the world of child stars, walking away isn't just about losing roles. It's about vanishing entirely. And Annette knew better than anyone what happened to people who vanished. But this wasn't just about Disney. It was about something deeper, a pattern that would repeat again and again in her life. People who said they cared. People who said they'd protect her. People who smiled to her face while tightening the leash around her neck. Disney may have built the cage, but the people she trusted most were the ones who kept locking the door. And it was only when her body began to betray her, when multiple sclerosis stole her voice and strength, that she finally saw the truth for what it was. But the pain wasn't new. It had always been there, silenced, polished, marketed, until she couldn't keep it hidden anymore. And that's when the names started appearing, one by one. Hollywood is a strange kind of heaven. It gives you everything: adoration, wealth, immortality, and takes everything in return. For Annette, the price was higher than most could imagine. She wasn't just famous. She was engineered, sold as the embodiment of purity, locked into an identity she never chose, and used as a shield to sell a fantasy America was desperate to believe in. But behind the magazine covers and movie posters, Annette lived in quiet fear. Not of monsters or villains, but of slipping just once from the image Walt Disney had created. Because she knew what would happen. The whispers would start, the rumors would spread, and her life, her real one, would be devoured by a machine that didn't care about truth. Only image. It wasn't just corporate control. It was personal. Her co-stars, the ones who smiled beside her on set, were often the first to turn cold the moment the camera stopped. One fellow actor once laughed when she collapsed from exhaustion backstage. No one called a doctor. No one helped her up. It wasn't in the script. Then came the rumors that she'd slept her way to the top, that she was difficult, fragile, too innocent to be taken seriously. She once had the chance to work alongside Elvis Presley, but the studio shut it down immediately. Not family-friendly, they said. Too dangerous to her image. And the image was everything. When she tried to move on from her teen idol status, she was pulled right back in. The _Beach Party _ films were supposed to be her chance to grow, films aimed at an older audience with more mature roles. Instead, they became a cruel joke. She was cast in bikinis, told to play naive and cute, while men around her chased screen time and applause. She wasn't a character, she was a prop, a backdrop for someone else's story. Even her pregnancies weren't immune. When she became visibly pregnant, co-stars and producers suggested cutting her close-up shots entirely. She's not attractive right now, one reportedly said. As if motherhood, the very thing Disney-style purity was supposed to celebrate, made her unwatchable. Everything was polished on the outside, smiles, posters, flowers in her dressing room. But every one of those petals came with thorns, and Annette learned to bleed quietly. The world adored her for being sweet, but it took them decades to realize that sweetness was manufactured and that the woman beneath was screaming. The cameras had long stopped rolling by the time the tremors began. At first, it was small, a shaky hand, a stumble. Then her voice began to fade. Her body no longer listened. And in the late 1980s, the diagnosis came like a whispered sentence. Multiple sclerosis, a degenerative neurological disease. There was no cure, no treatment, no escape. For anyone else, the diagnosis would have been a private tragedy. But for Annette, it became a mirror, and the reflection it showed was brutal. As her illness progressed, the silence grew louder. People who once called her a legend now kept their distance. Friends stopped calling. Industry contacts vanished. She was labeled a has-been. One cruel tabloid even suggested she should fade away gracefully before her legacy is tarnished. Her hands could no longer hold a microphone. Her legs refused to support her. Her voice, the voice that once sang to millions, became shaky, nearly unrecognizable. And yet, what hurt most wasn't the disease. It was the pity. The way people looked at her like a broken doll. But illness has a way of stripping away illusions. And for Annette, it removed the last of the filters. The people who had always used her now didn't need her. And in their absence, she saw the truth clearly for the first time. That's when she began to write. Not songs, not scripts, but names. She didn't vent. She didn't explain. She just wrote them down, 5 names. Quietly, deliberately. Names that meant nothing to the public, but everything to her. These weren't strangers. They were the people who knew her best. The ones who stood beside her on red carpets. The ones who toasted to her birthdays. The ones who smiled on stage and twisted the knife backstage. She didn't call it revenge. She called it truth. Because the final, bitter truth of her life wasn't that she got sick. It's that she spent her whole life being silenced. And it took losing her body for her voice to finally be heard. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She didn't leave a press release or a scandalous interview. She simply wrote 5 names, each one a closed wound that had never truly healed. And with those names, Annette Funicello shattered the illusion of a life that was never really hers. Name 1, Walt Disney. The magic man, ***, he discovered her, elevated her, made her a star. But in Annette's eyes, Walt Disney wasn't a savior. He was the architect of her prison. He was the most deceitful man in my life, she once wrote. But he did it all with a smile. To the world, he was a visionary. To her, he was control cloaked in kindness. She was 12 when he claimed ownership of her image. She would remain a child in the eyes of America for as long as he wanted. When she asked to play more serious roles, he said no. When she wanted to dress like a woman, he handed her a ring and said, "You belong to us." She thought he loved her like a daughter, But by the end, she realized he didn't love _her_. He loved what she represented. And that realization broke her. Not because he had been cruel, but because he made her believe his control was affection. He never yelled, never insulted, just nodded, frowned, and made her disappear. Name 2, Frankie Avalon. The thief of youth, ***, he was America's golden boy, the king of the beach, the icon of an era. But for Annette, Frankie Avalon wasn't a partner. He was a shadow that swallowed her entire identity. They starred in film after film together. But Annette didn't feel like a co-star. She felt like a prop. "I wasn't an actress," she wrote. "I was an accessory for him to shine." She once tried to wear a two-piece bikini like the other women on set. Frankie found it in her dressing room and threw it in the trash. "You're not Jane Mansfield," he said coldly. "You're Annette. You wear this." He handed her a full-body wetsuit. Even when she became pregnant, he pushed the producers to cut her close-ups. "She's not attractive," he allegedly said. She was carrying life, but to him, she was no longer camera-worthy. He smiled on talk shows, called her his sister, said he loved her like family. But to Annette, it was betrayal laced in charm. "He pinned my life to the stage," she wrote, "just so he could stay in the center of the frame." Frankie didn't betray her with cruelty. He did it with silence, with control, and that made it worse. Name 3, Shelley Fabre. The smiling blade, ***, to the world, Shelley Fabre was graceful, elegant, warm. On screen, she and Annette danced side by side, two Disney darlings lighting up the beach. But behind the camera, there was frost beneath the smile. Annette remembered the whispers, the strategic laughter, the perfectly timed compliments. She never yelled, Annette recalled. She never scolded. But she was always standing near the director, always whispering when I stumbled. One day, Annette tripped during a running scene. Her knees bled. Her palms scraped the sand. Shelley didn't flinch. She just clapped. "You felt like a pro. Give her an Emmy," she joked. After the shoot, a bouquet of flowers arrived in Annette's dressing room. The card read, _ you've always been my inspiration. Wishing you a speedy recovery. _ Annette kept that card for 30 years. Not out of fondness, but as a warning. She killed with ribbons, she wrote. With glances. With perfume-scented sympathy that left bruises instead of scars. And when Shelley replaced her in a major TV role, Annette didn't fight. She shattered a mirror in silence. Name 4, Paul Anka, the love that lied. ***, he never called her his lover. Never claimed her publicly. But he didn't need to. Because the world already believed _puppy love _ was written for Annette. She thought they shared something sacred. Whispered conversations backstage. Letters unsent. A card she gave him for his birthday. Still in his hand the night, she caught him holding another woman. She returned to her hotel, tore up every letter, and never spoke of him again. But she never stopped remembering. Years later, Paul was asked if he ever truly loved her. He laughed. _ she's the kind of girl everyone wants to marry, but no one dates. _ that one quote did more damage than any betrayal in private. It turned her into a symbol. Sweet, safe, but never enough. I love the song, she later wrote, but I wasn't the girl in it. I was just the name that helped it sell. Name 5, Tommy Kirk. The Mirror. ***, Tommy Kirk was her co-star in films like _The Shaggy Dog _ and _Swiss Family Robinson _. They were both stars of Disney's golden age. But when rumors spread that Tommy was gay, Disney fired him. Quietly, cruelly, without a second chance. Annette said nothing, not because she didn't care, but because she knew if she defended him, she'd be next. Years later, she wrote, I didn't hate Tommy. I hated myself, because he reminded me that I was a coward. He was the crack in the mirror I refused to look at. Of all the names, his was the one she circled, not out of anger, but out of guilt. Annette Funicello had spent her entire life speaking in carefully rehearsed sentences. She had mastered the art of the polite deflection, the innocent nod, the sweet smile that satisfied interviewers and silenced suspicion. She was trained from childhood not just to perform, but to protect an image, one that wasn't even hers. But in the final chapter of her life, when her hands trembled and her voice could barely whisper above a breath, Annette finally did something she'd never been allowed to do before. She told the truth, not in a press release, not in a televised interview or a tell-all book, but in ink, tucked in the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Inside a worn leather journal were 5 names. written by a woman who had been groomed to remain silent. No commentari, no preface, just 5 betrayals preserved like scars beneath the skin. To anyone else, it might have seemed vague, incomplete, but for Annette, it was complete, because those names weren't just memories. They were chapters of life never fully lived. They were her version of justice. Each name represented a choice she never got to make, a moment when her voice was taken, a turning point where silence was survival and obedience was currency. And when the world moved on, cheering for new stars, applauding new it girls, Annette was left behind, still carrying the weight of smiles she never met. And yet, she never lashed out. She never exposed them while they were still celebrated. She never demanded apologies because deep down, she knew none were coming. Hollywood doesn't apologize to its sacrifices. It immortalizes them and buries the pain beneath nostalgia. But this list? It wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. Each name was a mirror, a reminder of what had been taken, of the girl she could have been if anyone had asked how she felt instead of what she represented. Walt Disney, the man who turned her into a symbol but refused to let her grow. Frankie Avalon, who stood in the spotlight while quietly pushing her out of frame. Shelley Fabre, the friend who smiled while making sure Annette never stepped ahead. Paul Anka, the boy who taught her that being adored was not the same as being loved. And Tommy Kirk, not an enemy, but the ghost of everything she'd been too afraid to become. She wrote their names not to shame them, but to free herself. Because after years of being everyone's darling, she finally chose herself. The diary never made it into a museum. The pages were never quoted in tribute specials. But somewhere in those quiet, trembling letters was the voice of the real Annette Funicello, a woman who, for the first time, wasn't a product, wasn't a puppet, wasn't a princess. She was just Annette. And in the end, that was the most powerful thing she ever became. When people think of Annette Funicello, they remember the Mouseketeer ears, the beach movies, the gentle smile that never seemed to falter. They remember a girl who never aged, never complained, never stepped out of line. A forever young icon frozen in black and white photos and grainy television reels. But that image was never hers. It was manufactured, perfected, marketed. What they don't remember, what they were never allowed to see, is the woman behind the illusion. The woman who lived in fear of disappointing the man who discovered her. The woman who was dressed like a doll and told to stay sweet while her world quietly collapsed behind the scenes. The woman who was used, controlled, silenced, and replaced, and still smiled through it all. Until her body said no. Multiple sclerosis may have taken her strength, but it gave her something she'd never had before: freedom. Not physical freedom, but emotional clarity. And in that stillness, with cameras off and microphones unplugged, she told the only story that ever truly mattered. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to burn bridges. All it took was a list of names. 5 words written in ink. 5 memories that refused to fade. It was her final act, not of revenge, but of ownership. She died quietly, without controversy, without confrontation. The media called her graceful until the end. They praised her humility, her faith, her loyalty. But they missed the truth. Annette Funicello wasn't just graceful. She was haunted, and for all the love the world gave her, it was never enough to erase the damage done when she was just a child. So ask yourself, how many more girls did Hollywood turn into dolls? How many smiles were stitched onto faces that were quietly breaking? How many stars were used up, applauded, and then left to write their own truths in silence? Because Annette's story isn't just about Disney. It's about every perfect image you've ever been sold, every idol you've ever adored without asking what it cost them. So now you know the truth. The next time you see that iconic smile, remember, it didn't come from happiness. It came from survival. And somewhere, buried beneath the glitter, the music, the headlines, lies the voice of a woman who was never really allowed to speak. Until now,